Well, unfortunately, Andy has taken away half of my presentation with that introduction, and so I'm not quite sure. I now have to try to think of something new to say. The Carbon Holdings, the company's origins date back to 1996, and it's a slightly different type of establishment, one that you would not typically expect to see in the industrial sector. The company was founded at the campus of Harvard University whilst I was a junior in university. And the thought process behind it at the time was, first and foremost, there was a serious attraction from my side towards the industrial sector, but more importantly, there was also a desire to attempt to assist in the industrial development of Egypt. Now, during that period of 1995, 96, 97, you would find within any university campus that there were many startups being established. There was a certain sense of entrepreneurship that was in the air. This is what I probably consider to be my first mistake in life, in that I didn't establish a tech company like the rest of my colleagues who are now retired, and I decided to roll up my sleeves and attempt to enter the industrial sector. I was the sole employee of the company from that period of 1996 up until 2005. Since then, we've managed to grow in excess of about 500 today. We've successfully developed 2 projects which have been previously mentioned. One of the things we've been doing is picking select individuals to join the team as we've progressed over the past few years. For those of you within the industry, we've just recently poached the global head of mergers and acquisitions at INEOS. We poached the global head of oil, gas, mining and metals from HSBC. And we're looking at attracting major talent towards this little Egyptian company today, and to hopefully one day, I don't know in how many decades, be able to compete with Andy and his company. Or at least that'll be the point when we get put out of business. I'm not sure which one will happen first. The first project that we successfully established was Egypt Basic Industries Corporation. It was a 700,000 metric ton per day, 700,000 metric ton per year anhydrous ammonia production facility. The project was financed entirely by foreign banks, which is, I believe at the time it was probably the only project in Egypt. Today it's one of a select few. It was the first project to receive a comprehensive loan guarantee from the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which in itself was a grueling process. But of course, their involvement does afford the project the ability to secure a very, very low interest rate, one in the neighborhood of approximately 17.5 basis points above LIBOR. And when you take a look at the interest rates today in the market, that is obviously an extremely attractive spread to look at. The second project that we managed to successfully reach financial close, it's currently under construction, it's at month number 7, is Egypt Hydrocarbon Corporation. This project was extremely complicated, and it effectively became a test of perseverance. The development of the project began in 2006, right when EBIC closed, and so effectively it was falling in line with the philosophy of develop one project, have one project under construction, and have a third project entering into financing. And this way you'll always have this 3-project approach. EBIC was under construction. We commenced the development of this one, and we were looking to reach financial close in December 2008. Of course, the global financial crisis commenced in September 2008, at which point we pushed back until 2009, at which point you had complete chaos with the European banks, which readjusted the financing plan. We were able to secure 100% of the debt from 3 local banks, Ahli United Bank, Bank Masr, and Commercial International Bank. The loan documentation was signed on November the 22nd, 2010, and we were geared up for financial close on January the 31st, 2011. Of course, on January the 25th, the revolution commenced in Egypt, and what then happened was an exercise in effectively holding on to your shareholders as hard as you can, and the minute one of them disappears, you find another one, and then simultaneously holding on to your lenders because you're worried that the minute one part of the puzzle falls, the whole house could come tumbling down. We managed to successfully close on July the 31st, 2011, and issued a notice to proceed to the general contractor, ThyssenKrupp Uhde, in August 2011. This project is currently under construction, and we're expecting commissioning to commence 19 months from today. At the next point, we then began to look at what is the next project we're going to do. What are going to be the fundamentals to assist us in evaluating which project we're going to look at? First and foremost, Egypt is an oil and gas economy from an FDI perspective. At the end of the day, the oil and gas sector accounts for over 50% of all foreign direct investment in Egypt. This is the business that we do. This is where our comparative advantage is. When you take a look at the events that happened globally, the global financial crisis, the revolution, the current European debt crisis, it is apparent that conventional methods of financing will no longer be available to mega projects in this country for an extended period of time. This, of course, is going to result in sponsors having to develop alternative methods of financing, or what I would call somewhat creative methods of financing, which will be more complex, which will take a much longer period of time, and which unfortunately are also going to result in a substantial cost during the financing phase prior to financial close. There's also another element that I didn't put down here. There was another revolution in the oil and gas sector that took place in May 2008, which was the issuance of Law 114. And it's a very, very important point to say, because if you track investments in the oil and gas sector, what you will find is that they declined 75% the moment this law was passed. This was the one that effectively set the energy policy of the country, revoked the free zone status, and it created chaos for a lot of the foreign investors that we have here. The consequence of that for us is that we were able to work in Egypt without other people around us. And this is something that unfortunately was in our benefit, but it is something that I am hearing is going to be amended or potentially repealed in the near future, and something that I hope takes place. Another important point, a lot of people will say Egypt's geographical location, Egypt's geographical importance. No one has actually ever taken a look at what that precisely means. We have a substantial geographical advantage due to the position of Egypt. And it has increased exponentially given the price of oil. At the end of the day, oil is responsible for the pricing of fuel, and what we are seeing globally is that the freight differentials between CFR and FOB has increased so substantially that it can reach 25 to 50% of the actual FOB price. What this effectively means is that if you have a disadvantage vis-a-vis one producer, this most likely can be recovered due to the logistics costs. Finally, one of the elements that we took a look at is the local industry in Egypt. We have something that is untapped. We have a population in excess of 80 million people, and we have a very infant industry. At the end of the day, any facility that is placed in Egypt that is able to successfully produce, one can almost guarantee that in a period of 7 to 10 years, 100% of that production will be consumed locally. And this is the basic concept of industrial development. This gives you an idea, this map, of the actual shipping lanes that are utilized by the carriers to go to the different markets. One of the things that we did that was interesting is we actually retained a consultant, and we said, here are your location points. Give us the cost. Give us a matrix of all of the major producers globally shipping to all of these destinations, and put it in a table. What we found is that Egypt was not the cheapest to ship anywhere. But we found that Egypt was number 2 or number 3 for every single destination globally. And what that means is that you can effectively move production north, south, east, and west. And you can react to changes in the market. Whereas other production facilities that have a specific geographic location, they are dependent upon the economy of that location. And if there's a disruption in that economy, they are unable to compete globally due to it. When we take a look at basic industrial development, and this is perhaps what I would call one of the most important charts that we have ever created. And oil, for most of us, is obviously an extremely important commodity. We hear of the price increasing or decreasing every single day when we watch the news. But the typical assumption is that the critical importance of oil is fuel. That's what we put in our car, that's what goes in airplanes. That's probably 40% of the story, maybe even less. The reality is that if you follow what happens to oil, and you go all the way to the right, you will effectively find that it is responsible for the production of absolutely everything with the exception of the wooden table and chair that are around us. These particular products can only be obtained through the establishment of a naphtha cracker. And that is immediately what we started to look at. And this is where we started to see a niche. There is not one naphtha cracker in Egypt. We then took a look at the continent of Africa, and we realized there is one in Ras Lanuf in Libya, with an unknown condition at this point. There are talks of potentially developing others, but you're effectively looking at none in North Africa. You take a look at the population of Egypt, and then you take a look on the right-hand side of all of these different products, and you start to ask yourself, where are we getting these products from? And we found two interesting things. For the existing local manufacturing industry, they're actually importing their intermediate products, which is extremely illogical. Or we found an even worse case, where they're actually importing in mass quantities the finished products. And this is not sustainable in the long term for any economy. The history of this project is actually interesting. In the late 1950s, two projects were presented to President Nasser. And this was a time of revolution. This was a time of national fervor. And those projects were a steel mill or a naphtha cracker. And when he took a look at the two, he said, no one will understand what this naphtha cracker is. Let's do a steel mill. This is a time of war. People will understand that this is strength, this is power. We can make bullets, we can make guns. And I genuinely believe that we have suffered from that point onwards. When we take a look at the economy of South Korea, and I had the opportunity to spend several weeks in South Korea recently, and I had a conversation with a minister there. And he began to talk to me about Egypt and to talk to me about the organizational structure of the country. And to tell me, for example, when you're done with university, you're recruited into the army and you spend 1 year, if you don't have this degree, if you have that degree, you spend 3 years as an officer. And he started going through absolute specifics, at which point I asked him, you must have been the ambassador to Cairo for you to know so much about the country. He said, no, I've just described to you South Korea. And so I was a little taken aback, and I asked, what do you mean? He said, after the Korean War concluded in 1961, we took a look globally at which country we would like to be in 50 years. And we found this country called Egypt that had an economy that was 2.5 times the size of South Korea and with an equal-sized population. And we said, let us spend 6 months there. Let us establish ourselves exactly like Egypt. And then at that point in time, we can maybe be like them in 50 years. What that tells me is that the model works. The model that we have here today does work. The issue that we have is implementation and execution. And this was the critical mistake that we made. When we take a look at the industrial development of South Korea, they built 3 naphtha crackers. One in the northern part, one in the south, and one in the center. And the philosophy was, build it and they will come. If you produce the intermediate products, eventually the small businessman will come and take a few tons of the plastic raw material and make whistles. Eventually he's going to improve his production process and he's going to make a lighter. Then eventually he's going to make a pen with some moving parts. And before you know it, he's starting to manufacture cases for mobile phones and computers and highly advanced composites for the aerospace industry. And this is the national progression of development. You cannot skip steps, but you need to put in the hands of the population the basic products and the raw materials. We identified in red what are the critical basic materials that we would need. If we produce these products, we can go downstream, but more importantly, we will be able to attract so many other people who will come and say, can we get some of this product because we have another project that we're going to do. We then configured a project based upon this chart. We'll bring in naphtha as a feedstock. We'll have a naphtha cracker that produces everything in blue. The red items are going to be the finished products at this point in time, and the ethylene will go into polyethylene to make the raw material for plastics. Now, what was interesting is that you'll hear of these mega projects in the Arabian Gulf, $10 billion, $15 billion, $20 billion. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury here. We don't have the ability to structure projects this large. What we did here is we took a look at the concept, where we want to end up, and we started with the absolute minimum and started running sensitivities. And we would see whether we could just make it capable, just barely capable of being financed by the international market with that structure. When it didn't work, we added another product. When that didn't work, we added another product. And we kept growing it very, very slowly until we reached a point where, yes, this can now attract financing in this particular shape. We then began the process, obviously, of speaking to a variety of counterparties, speaking to various investors, looking at the feedstock, looking at the offtake. And there was one more critical element to this project. It had to be done on a mark-to-market basis. Anyone who develops a project that is fundamentally underpinned by subsidies is destined to fail. We had to be able to stand up on our feet, importing the feedstock at market prices and exporting our products and utilizing Egypt's geographical position as an advantage, utilizing the 80 million people that live here as an advantage, and speaking to other partners for future downstream expansion that would let us participate in the value-added nature of the project. In looking at the global financial crisis, in looking at the first European crisis, in looking at the Arab Spring, in looking now at the complete meltdown of the European banking market, and for those of you who are involved in the industry, what they can tell you is that Europe cannot lend you $1 million today. They can lend you 100 million euros, but not dollars. There is a serious dollar shortage. We realize that we have to go to export credit agencies. We need a government lender who is not affected by any of these events. More importantly, export credit agencies will guide your procurement towards their host countries. And so effectively, they're indirectly subsidizing their own industries by giving you funding to purchase commodities from them. We're looking at a total project cost of $2.7 billion, of which the debt facility is $2.6 billion. The Export-Import Bank of the United States will be looking to make a direct loan in the amount of $1.4 billion. We have submitted our application for financing in November of last year. We have appointed all of the relevant consultants required for this process. They have concluded their reports, and we are expecting a commitment letter from the US government in a preliminary form sometime during the month of April. It is being done on a joint venture basis for the entire debt facility with the government of South Korea. The Korean government, through their export credit agency, K-EXIM, will be looking to make a direct loan and a loan guarantee. And typically, that's what they do. Whatever the value of the loan that you're looking for from the Koreans, they will direct fund up to 60% of that amount, but they'll give you effectively an insurance policy for the remaining 40%, in which you can go to any commercial bank and say, I've got the credit of South Korea behind me, will you lend me money? They will be looking at a $720 million direct loan from them and a $480 million comprehensive loan guarantee that we will then take to local banks here in Egypt to fund under the loan guarantee. And it's important in my mind that local banks are involved in these projects. And this is one of the realizations that I have seen over the past few years, that it's important for the local economy. It's important for them to get this exposure, and more importantly, it's important for them to be seen as leading the way in the industrial development of the country. It is an ambitious project, one that we commenced work on in 2006, 2007, but one that, in my opinion, has withstood so many disturbances in the global economy, both locally, regionally, and internationally, that it has in fact passed what I would call the screening process of overall viability. Because at the end of the day, with all the various sensitivities we ran, it stood up. And more importantly, if you ask me, it lays the foundation stone for the industrial development of the economy, and more importantly, for the development of a true petrochemical industry that I believe will probably compete with that of the Arabian Gulf. Thank you very much.